Disclaimer: all the story and images/graphics used in the video belong to their respective owners. I or this channel do not claim any rights over them, all credits to the respected owner. Chapter 61, Get Lost. What do you mean that I cannot enter? My son is here. Are you trying to say that I can't see him? Jack felt that the voice was somehow familiar. It was only after a moment that he suddenly remembered that that was Dalton's voice. After all, he had talked to him not long ago. But what made him frown was the fact that Dalton had somehow known where he was staying. If he remembered correctly, the only person that knew where he lived was Evans as well as Sabrina. As for George, there was no need for him to be mentioned considering the fact that he was always low-key. In other words, Dalton might have gotten his information from either Evans or Sabrina. But there was also another option. They had tracked his location the moment that he lost his focus about the phone after he received the advance reward from the system. With the current technology level, it wasn't hard for them to track his location as long as his call was connected. According to what he could remember, he had forgotten that he was holding a phone in his hand for about 5 minutes. With the resources that Alfonso family possessed, it was not hard for them to find his location in just 2 minutes, let alone 5. But the thing that made him mostly unhappy was the fact, even after Dalton knew that Jack was not in a mood to meet with him, he still came. Furthermore, he was not following the normal procedures that one should when he's going to visit another person. Although he didn't like his father, he was still quite curious about what made him to come all the way from Crystal City, just to look for him. He stepped out of the mansion and found that the security guards were busy trying to prevent Dalton from entering the mansion. The moment that he got out of the mansion, the guards noticed him. The commotion also stopped at this moment. Everyone present looked at Jack waiting for his decision. Jack was in no hurry at all. He walked step by step till he arrived in front of Dalton. With a frown on his face, he asked, "What do you want?" Dalton wasn't surprised by Jack's attitude towards him. He knew that this son of his didn't like him just like he didn't like him at all. But at this moment, the situation that they were in didn't allow him to care whether he liked his son or not, or vice versa. He looked at Jack and stated calmly, "I am here to take you back home." The moment that Jack heard these words, the frown on his face deepened further. "I'm home already. What home are you talking about? Furthermore, why should I come with you?" he asked as he looked at Steve, who was standing just behind Dalton. Dalton didn't expect that Jack would ask such a question. According to what he had thought, Jack would readily accept to go back with him to the Alfonso mansion. But after thinking things through, considering what had happened from the moment that Jack stepped out of the family mansion, it was normal for him to behave in such a way. After all, the treatment that he got from the family wasn't good at all. Furthermore, he was expelled from the family not long ago. Additionally, his condition wasn't that pathetic to make him wish to go back with him. He could already see this from the conditions that Jack was living in. Taking a deep breath, Dalton spoke, "I know that I had expelled you from the family. But I have changed my mind and I have decided to take you back. Just to show you my sincerity, I came here in person." Dalton wasn't a family head for nothing. He was a person who thought forward and knew how to use the circumstances to his advantage. If he wasn't smart, Victor would not have handed over the position of the family head to him. Of course, Jack was not a gullible child to believe such an obvious lie. He knew that there must be a reason behind why they wanted him to go back. So, he wanted to know the reason. But no matter what the reason was, he had already made up his mind not to go back to that place. "I am not a little child that you can lie to that easily," Jack stated as he stared directly into Dalton's eyes. There was nothing to hide at this moment. He never liked this father of his, and that will not change even now. The respect that he was giving him currently was not throwing him out of his compound. After all, this can be considered trespassing into another person's property. If Jack called the police, they would stand on his side. Dalton sighed and decided to tell part of the truth. "You are getting engaged today. So I am here to take you back home." The moment that Jack heard these words, his expression shifted considerably. Slowly, Anger began surfacing on his face as the rage that was already inside his heart was threatening to burst out again. He looked at Dalton and asked curiously, "Who is that girl that I'm getting engaged to?" Dalton's expression eased the moment that he heard Jack's words. He slowly thought to himself, "Looks like I should have said these words from the beginning. Who knew that it would have saved me a lot of time?" He chuckled as he said, "The lady that you are getting engaged to is not only beautiful but she comes from a bigger background, far bigger than our Alfonso family." Dalton's words were filled with pride as well as eagerness and greed. He was proud that even the big families would still come to his family for marriage. As for eagerness and greed, that was for wealth and the benefits that he would get from having a relationship with such a big family. Unfortunately, his dreams and hopes were shattered by Jack's next words. "You can go back and have Steve engaged to her. I don't care who she is, but I hope that you won't interfere with my personal life. After all, I am not a member of Alfonso family anymore." Jack's words were cold. Even if the one that was getting engaged to him was the daughter of the president, there was no way that he was going to agree to that engagement, considering the fact that even the two of them had never met before. How could he, a man, accept such a choice to be made for him? There was no way that he was going to agree to marry a person that he had never met before. Furthermore, considering that she was coming from a bigger family, it was obvious that she was proud. He wasn't ready to deal with a proud and arrogant wife. "What did you just say?" Dalton seemed not to believe what his ears had heard. "I said that I don't want to get engaged to anyone I don't know. Furthermore, this is my personal life and I don't want anyone unrelated to interfere with it. So, if you want to make a connection between your Alfonso family and some other big family, you better get one of your sons to do that because I'm not one." Jack stated his words one by one. Steve, who was standing just behind Dalton, felt like he was going to burst from anger. Although he wanted to be the one that was going to be engaged to the lady, they had not chosen him. And for that, he was quite angry already. Now that Jack kept on mentioning that he was to be engaged to the other party, his anger continued to soar the more that Jack spoke. It was like Jack was having food while he on the other hand was starving. Instead of eating his food quietly, Jack kept on describing to him the taste of the food. How could he not be angry in such a situation? But before he could erupt, Dalton spoke. "Your personal life? I have to be concerned about it and I will interfere because I am your father." Dalton was just about to continue talking about how he was qualified to get Jack engaged to someone, when Jack interrupted him. "What qualifications do you have to claim to be my father? From childhood to this moment, I want to believe that this is the longest conversation that we have ever had. As a father, what did you do that proves that I am your son? Mother and I have always gone through a lot in that mansion, but you never cared. The moment that mother died, you never showed up during her funeral. Even after she died, I was left to survive alone in that mansion. Now that an opportunity has appeared, you are trying to tell me that you are my father? Do you think that you are qualified?" Dalton wasn't the only person that was stunned by Jack's words. Nobody in the surrounding had expected that Jack could erupt in such a way. But even so, all the men around except for Dalton and Steve showed a change in their expression. After all, what was the use of trying to have a son if you are not ready to take care of him? Even if he wasn't ready to take care of him, he should have at least shown his support. Living a rough life in his own home, that was something that he could have prevented. But at the end of the day, he did nothing about it. "You better get lost from here right now. I don't want to see your face in this compound ever again." Before that one could speak again, Jack said these words as he turned around with the intention of going back into the mansion. Dalton was not ready to let an opportunity for his future rise go away under his watch. He looked at the three bulky men behind him and signaled them to go and capture Jack. There was no hesitation in their movements at all. The moment that they received the order, they immediately pounced towards Jack. Chapter 62, Family. The movements of the three wasn't slow at all. In fact, they were fast as they were professionals and had undergone vigorous training. The reason as to why they moved forward together was due to the fact that they wanted to subdue Jack and not to beat him up. So, to make sure that he suffered no injuries, they had to move together. Although Jack had some muscles on him, they didn't think too much about it. After all, what could a little teenage brat like him do? They didn't know how mistaken they were when they underestimated Jack. If this was before, they could have indeed subdued him easily with the combined effort of the three of them. But now that Jack was a professional combatant, they were absolutely no match against him. The moment that they made a move, Jack narrowed his eyes. Currently, not only had his strength increased, but the strength of his five senses had been drastically improved as well as his sense of danger. One of the bulky men stepped forward at a fast speed as he stretched his hand towards Jack's shoulder. On the other hand, the other two moved towards the sides, ensuring that they blocked Jack's escape route. Their movements were abrupt and the guards of the mansion failed to react on time. Furthermore, Jack was closer to the bulky men than he was to them. So, they knew that by the moment that they arrived before Jack, they would be too late. But even so, they made a move. The moment that he noticed the hand that was coming towards him, Jack didn't act rashly. He calmly leaned to the side, evading the hand that was trying to grab his shoulder. Then, he stretched his hand forward and grabbed the hand that was trying to be retracted. His motions were swift and fast. Every move of his was precise and accurate. The moment that he grabbed the hand, he immediately pulled the stunned bulky guy towards him before using his shoulder to bang onto his chest. The moment that they connected, Jack released his hand and let the guy fly a few feet backwards from the force. But of course, Jack had made sure not to use his full strength at this moment. Otherwise, he would have broken some bones in that guy's body. The reason for going easy on him was obviously due to the fact that this guy was just doing someone else's will. Otherwise, Jack wouldn't have been so polite. The moment that the guy went for the grab to the moment that he was sent flying happened in just a matter of seconds. Nobody had foreseen such a result the moment that the three made a move. The two that were just about to grab Jack from the sides immediately paused their movements as they stared at Jack cautiously. They were people who had experienced fights many times and they didn't dare to be careless when facing someone like Jack. At this moment, they could tell that Jack wasn't an average youth. He was someone that had strength to compete against them. Although they were stunned, they still maintained their attentive postures, ready to make a move as long as Jack made one. On the other hand, the guards that were charging forward madly and angrily immediately paused for a moment. They stared at Jack with wide eyes, not knowing what to do. As for Dalton and Steve, they were motionless as they stared at Jack as if they didn't know him. Well, that could be said to be true considering the fact that they never interacted with him with the intention of knowing him at all. Their mouths were agape at this moment as they stared at Jack. According to what they knew about Jack, although he trained in the gym, they never thought that he was a master when it came to fighting. After all, only a master when it came to fighting would have the capability of throwing back a strong person like the one that Jack had just thrown. After a moment, Dalton regained his senses. The moment that he thought of what was waiting for him, the moment that he went back without Jack, he immediately roared to the two that were still standing at the side while looking at Jack. "What are you two waiting for? Grab him! Attack at once! How can a little boy make the both of you so afraid? Aren't you paid for such works?" This shout immediately made the two move forward. They knew that Dalton wouldn't accept a failure. They knew that there was an important guest back at the mansion. So, for Dalton to come here personally for Jack, that meant that this was important. Furthermore, they had already heard the conversation between the two of them. They knew that Jack was supposed to be engaged. Since that was the case, they had to make sure that they grabbed him even if they had to be a little forceful. They attacked without hesitation. This time, they were attacking with the intention of immobilizing him. But, they made sure to avoid the vital areas as they threw their punches. Jack's reaction wasn't slow at all. The moment that one of the punches reached closer to his face, he used his right hand to push the fist to the side, before throwing a kick towards the one that threw the punch. Thwack! The moment that the kick connected, the guy flew backwards just like the guy before. He landed almost a dozen feet away from Jack's position. Immediately after kicking away one of them, Jack bent backwards, evading the other punch. The moment that he evaded the punch, He leaned back forward and threw a fist towards the other party's chest. This one didn't idle as well. He raised his left arm to block the fist. But, just before they connected, Jack changed the angle of his fist as it brushed past the raised arm and landed on his chest. Just like the others, this guy was also thrown back. But, Jack had made sure that he didn't use too much strength to make sure that they didn't get too hurt. But, it seemed that he had made a miscalculation. The moment that these guys realized that their injuries were shallow, they thought that Jack's forte was agility and not strength. And that was the reason as to why his punches were not that strong. They were just about to rush up for the second round when the more than a dozen guards arrived. The guards weren't weak as well. Furthermore, they had divided themselves, 4 for each person. The guards weren't polite at all. These guys had just attacked their client in their presence. This was akin to provocation. How could they take it lightly? So, at that moment, punches, kicks, stomps and headbutts rained on the 3 poor guys. They hadn't thought that the guards would make a move on them. Furthermore, there were 12 of them. So, although they were stronger than them, they weren't a match for 4 of them at the same time. Dalton, too, hadn't expected that Jack would be so fierce. Furthermore, he hadn't counted on the fact that the guards would also attack the moment that the 3 men that he brought with him made a move. He looked at them and shouted, "How dare you make a move on my men? Do you know who I am? Do you not want your lives again?" The moment that he shouted these words, the person that was on charge amongst the guards stopped beating the person beneath him as he looked at Dalton. Then, he said coldly, "Sir, you made the first move here. And, you were not welcomed here, you trespassed. Furthermore, you're trying to use force to attack our client. It's our duty to protect him." The moment that he said this, Dalton was infuriated further. At this moment, Steve, who was stunned, finally spoke. "What do you know? This is a family matter. He's my younger brother, so don't get involved here." "Hey, I'm not your brother. And, if I remember correctly, according to our bet, you're not supposed to step your foot here in Inchoate. But surprisingly, here you are, in my own compound." Jack sneered. Then, he continued without waiting for Steve to speak. "Furthermore, even if this is a family matter, I don't think that these 3 are Alfonso's, right?" Jack's words made Steve turn pale. The moment that Dalton took him along, he had completely forgotten about the bet, as at that time, all that was in his mind was about the engagement. Now that Jack had reminded him, he immediately knew that he was surely going to receive the attack from off-track racers. After all, they were the ones that were in charge of making sure that all the bets that were made under their supervision were followed to the latter. Before he could say another word, Dalton interrupted. "What do you mean that they cannot be involved? They are part of our Alfonso family as they work for our family." His voice was stunned as he looked at Jack. Jack simply gave him a look and looked at the dozen guards as he said, "They work for me, so they're part of my family. On the other hand, you're not part of my family. So, you shouldn't be here at this moment." Jack wasn't polite at all. There was no need for him to be polite with someone like Dalton. Dalton didn't understand politeness, all that he knew was benefits. Dalton was stunned for a moment before speaking. "Jack, if you don't want things to go to the extent that you can't handle, you better come back with me at this moment." Upon noticing that force wasn't working, he decided to try blackmail and coercion. "I don't think that you should be concerned about me. So, you can just roll out of my place now. If anything happens, I'll take care of it on my own." Jack's words made Dalton frown. Then, the moment that they registered in his mind, he looked at Jack wide-eyed as he asked, "This is your place?" Chapter 63, Wedding Date Agreed Upon. "Where did you get the money to buy this mansion? It's over 30 million. Furthermore, what about those cars? Are they yours as well? You, tell me where you got all this money right now." Dalton gave Jack no chance to reply at all as he began asking even more questions. He remembered that the moment that they had arrived, he had been attracted by the rows of cars that had been parked here. He thought that they belonged to the owner of the palace, but he didn't think that Jack was the owner. Furthermore, at that time, his mind was still thinking about how to get Jack back to Crystal City with him. So, things like observing the logos on the cars and whatsoever was not in his mind at all. Even now, he completely ignored the logos as he looked at Jack, awaiting for his answers. Jack stared at him coldly before snorting, "I don't think that I have to give you an explanation about my personal life. So, you better not try asking me about anything because I won't tell you a thing. Furthermore, I think we're done here. So, you better leave." Immediately after that, he shifted his gaze to the guards and said, "You guys should send them away. If they cause more trouble, just call the police and report that there's someone that is trespassing here." The guards nodded their heads vigorously at Jack's words. They knew that they had already failed theory duty before the moment that they failed to react on time when the 3 men that came with Dalton attacked Jack. So, to make up for that, they immediately beat up the 3 to a pulp. Now that Jack had instructed that they had to send these uninvited guests away, there was no way that they were going to delay at all. They turned towards the duo father and son and the 3 on the ground. At this moment, they put on the expressions that showed that they would attack if Dalton and the rest did not leave at this moment. Dalton saw their determined expressions and knew that there was nothing that they could do at this moment. It was just that he'd brought a few men. If he had brought even more men, he would have taken Jack with him. Although his mind was filled with anger and at the same time many questions, he decided to put the matters away at the moment. He knew all too well that he had to look for a better explanation that would satisfy Alton. Otherwise, there was going to be a problem. After taking a deep breath, he looked at the men that he'd brought alongside him and said, "You pieces of trash, get off the ground right now. We're leaving." And as he said those words, he immediately began walking towards the helicopter that had landed not far from the garage. But he didn't forget to give the guards a cold glare before looking at the mansion that Jack had just entered. And with that, he left alongside his men. Steve also followed behind them. But he was walking as if his soul had just flown away from his body at this moment. After all, he had just broken his end of the bet. As a result, he would be banned from participating in the races as long as off-track racers were involved. He himself used racing to show off on front of his peers. Now that he was going to be banned from his favorite hobby, he really wanted to cry at this moment. He wondered why he had forgotten about such an important thing. After getting back into the mansion, Jack's mood was quite low. Of course, this wasn't related to Dalton by a bigger margin. The reason for his low mood at the moment was due to the fact that he'd been reminded about his mother. At this moment, tears threatened to fall from his eyes as he remembered the time that he'd caught her crying. But, at the end of it all, he managed to hold it in and didn't shed a tear. He was trying to bury those hurtful memories in the deepest parts of his heart. After a long period, Jack finally calmed himself down and got a grip of his emotions. He headed upstairs and entered the bathroom. The moment that he removed his clothes, his expression changed. He could see that his muscles were now well defined. He could see the 8 packs that could be seen even from a distance. His biceps and triceps had become slightly more muscular than before. But the main change that he could feel was definitely that his muscles had been compacted. Although they were not that big, but they had unimaginable strength in them. After freshening up, he slept till he was awoken by the ringing of his phone. Upon checking who it was that was calling him, he found that it was an unfamiliar number. After a moment of hesitation, he received the call. "Hello, sir, your package has arrived." A young male voice reached his ears at that moment. Jack immediately sat up and the sleepiness that was still in his eyes was swept away. He said, "Can you give one of the guards a phone?" "Okay," the other party replied. And before long, a familiar voice reached his ears. "Hello, boss." It was the voice of the leader of the guards here, the captain. "Let him in," Jack stated simply. "Okay." The guard replied before he ended the call. Jack headed downstairs to wait for the delivery guy to arrive. Not long after, a young man arrived at the mansion's entrance under the guidance of one of the guards. The moment that he appeared, Jack received the invoice from him. After confirming the details, he signed it before paying for the laptop through his phone. He then took the box that had the laptop inside it before walking back into the mansion. He opened it and found the laptop that he'd just ordered. The laptop that he just ordered happened to be the most expensive laptop that he could find in the website. It was MJ Swarovski diamond-studded notebook. This laptop could be said to be covered in diamonds. Maybe that was where the name came from? He wasn't sure about that. But it was quite expensive for a laptop. It cost him a total of $35 million to get it. But, according to the description about it, its performance was top-notch. It was just good for his use here as he was going to start the enterprise. After looking at it for a while, he powered it on. The screen lit up. After a moment of settings and connecting the laptop to a power source, Jack was finally done with the testing. It was also at this moment that he remembered that he still had some documents that he had to take care of. So, he immediately entered the mailbox on his phone and downloaded the contract that had been sent to him. After that, he downloaded an app that could be used for signing documents. After making that everything about the contract was okay, Jack immediately signed it before mailing it back. Currently, it was already 5 in the evening. He had forgotten about this issue after dealing with Dalton. Now, he wasn't sure if the lady was still there or if she had already signed off for the day. Just as he was waiting, he immediately received a confirmation that the contract had been approved. The moment that he noticed this, Jack immediately completed the payment. Jack's balance was $11,149,985,379 after yesterday's earnings. That included the one that came from Ben as well as the one from the stores. On this day, he spent a little bit of the money. He spent $35 million for the laptop as well as the one that he just sent at this moment. In total, he'd spent $1.187 billion. This brought his current balance to $9,962,985,379. This was just enough to get the security company as well as expand it. As Jack was busy with his laptop and calculating balances, he didn't know what had happened back at the Alfonso mansion while he was sleeping. The moment that Dalton got back, he found that Alton was getting impatient. But, the moment that Alton saw him, his expression eased a lot. The lady that had come with him was also visibly excited, although she tried containing her emotions. They watched as Dalton entered the living room alongside Steve, who was following from behind with almost dead eyes. They were waiting for Jack to step into the room when they were surprised that nobody entered after the duo. Alton was just about to ask about it when Dalton spoke. "I'm sorry for the long wait, Master Alton. I'm just from Inchoate City, but I wasn't able to bring Jack along with me." He spoke with sweat already beginning to accumulate on his forehead. His heart was beating rapidly at this moment as he tried to find his way out of the situation. "What do you mean?" Alton frowned. He had waited for over 2 hours only to be told that the one that he had been waiting for wasn't coming? He was immediately displeased. Dalton hurriedly explained, "It's not that he doesn't want to come. It's just that the moment that I arrived in Inchoate City, he had already left and headed to Tulsan City. So, even if we want to get him here, it would take more than 6 hours and nighttime would have already arrived." Of course, this was just something that he'd thought of and decided to use it. Then, he would make sure that he brought Jack back to the family at all costs and by all means necessary. Alton's eyes were sharp as he observed Dalton's expression. Although Dalton hid it so well, there was no way that he could hide from Alton that there was something that he was hiding. But, Alton didn't want to waste so much time on this issue. So, he looked at Victor and asked, "Can we finalize this engagement without him?" "Yes, yes, yes." Dalton hurriedly nodded his head in agreement. His excitement could be seen as his smile was so wide at that moment. "Just to make sure that things are okay, we'll sign an agreement that Jack will marry my granddaughter here when they're 21 years old," Alton stated. When they heard this, both Victor and Dalton were excited and agreed to sign the agreement. Not long after, they agreed on the exact date of the wedding, which was stated to be a week after the birthday of the youngest of the two. Poor Jack, He was busy with his own things, not knowing that although he hadn't accepted the engagement, his date of marriage had already been planned for and preparations were being made already. Chapter 64, Full Authority Over the Department. The following morning, Jack woke up as usual. There was no need for him to hurry anything at all. Now that his body had become strong, there was no need for him to go to the gym. The gym was like a place for children. If he went there, it would be no different from an adult going to a kindergarten playground. After breakfast, Jack took one of the Bentegas in the compound and drove it towards the business overlord building. He was going to meet up with Grace on this day. After that, he would be heading to Venture City. By the time that he would be done with the meeting and signing the contract with Grace, he was sure that Gabriel Waddy, the pilot that he had just hired, would have arrived. And with that, he could head to Venture City for the issue concerning the Safety Enforcers Security Company. Not long after, Jack arrived at the Overlord building. Tim greeted him as usual. Jack liked this guy as he was quite diligent in his duties. He decided that if Tim wanted to change the company that he was working with, he surely would take him in. The Business Overlord building was as desolate as before. Since only one department was here at this moment, there were not that many people. Furthermore, it was only the management of the grocery department that was here and not all the employees of the department. After taking the elevator, Jack arrived on the 30th floor. He went ahead and placed the newly bought laptop on his desk before taking a seat. Currently, it was slightly 30 minutes past 8 in the morning. The sun was still warm on the skin as it shone on him through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows. Jack relaxed for a moment as he enjoyed the sun. After about 10 minutes, he called Grace. After a moment, the call connected. "Hello, Mr. Jack." "Good morning." "Morning, Miss Grace. When you reach the building, you can find me on the 30th floor." Jack greeted back before stating the reason for calling. "Oh, I have already arrived. I'll be there in 2 minutes." Grace stated. "Okay then." Jack nodded before ending the call. He then thought that this Grace was really meticulous in her dealings. It was just around 8:45, the appointment time, but she had already arrived. It seemed that this was one of the traits of the employees that were serious about time management. Jack didn't have to wait for long before he heard a knock on the door. On this floor, once a person reached it, they would arrive at a corridor first before entering his office. A lady then walked into the office. Her temperament showed that she was both capable and decisive. There was confidence in each and every step of hers. Just from the outlook, Jack could tell that she seemed to be in her late 20s. She was wearing an official brown business suit that completely matched her cold face. Although she was a beauty, her face gave the vibe that she didn't want to be disturbed. On the other hand, although she had expected that Jack would be young just from his voice, she never thought that he would be this young. From the way that he looked, it was as if he was just entering his second decade. Apart from that, his silver hair and blue eyes were quite unique and gave a majestic vibe. Just from the way that he was seated there, she could feel some kind of oppression from him, the kind that she had only felt from the big bosses. No, it seemed to be even more powerful than what she had felt from the big bosses. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of background Jack had for him to have such a temperament at such a young age. Just from his sharp blue eyes accompanied with his handsome face that had no emotions currently, she felt her evaluation of him rising. Of course, Jack didn't know that his temperament and the way that he carried himself had changed after receiving the professional combatant ability. His muscle memory seemed the same, but this was in fact due to the merging of the pieces of memories that had come alongside the reward. After arriving in front of the desk, Jack immediately motioned for her to seat. And after seating, without waiting for Jack to speak, she took out a few documents and handed them over to Jack. Jack received them and took a look. He read through them one by one and was impressed. Grace had graduated from a good university in the country, Achievers University. It was amongst the best 10 universities in the country and was ranked 9th. She had performed well and currently, she had already gotten her master's degree. The PhD was the one that was missing. But overall, her educational background could be considered to be excellent. As for her performance, that would depend on how she performed here. If she did well, Jack might as well promote her in the future once the enterprise expanded. After placing the documents back on the desk, Jack said, "You can send me these documents to my email later. As for the contract, what conditions do you think will ensure that your performance is at its peak?" Grace was startled for a moment by that question. She thought that the employees were the ones being given the conditions that they needed to fulfill so that they could be employed. Now, here Jack was asking her if there was a condition that she needed for her performance to be at the peak. Although she was somehow stunned, she regained her composure in a few breaths as she replied. "The thing that I mainly want is support in the decisions that I make for the department. After all, before making a decision, I always make sure to have done enough research about it first." Jack nodded. He wasn't planning to get involved in the management himself. He would only be involved if necessary. Otherwise, he would just relax while trying to find other opportunities to invest in. Secondly, it could be good if I can get enough financial support. There are some activities that might need money. So, it would be good if money is readily available. In this way, in case of emergencies, I can easily deal with them without having to go around just to get the money. Finally, that would be the authority to evaluate the subordinates by introducing some of the methods that I myself know. If they perform poorly, I can be allowed to dismiss one and hire another. Jack looked at her and said simply, "You don't have to worry about that. In fact, the moment that you're going to take over your post, I will be leaving everything to you. So, you'll be making the decisions concerning the department. I will only get myself involved if necessary. As for finances, you don't need to worry about that. There should be enough capital to ensure the stability of the department as well as expand. So, that's the least problem. And finally, you can evaluate the ones below you. If their performance is average, you can as well dismiss them. In other words, I'm giving you power over the entire department. So, you can do whatever you want as long as the results are good. But if they're not good, you know what will happen." Grace had her mouth agape the moment that Jack finished speaking. She never thought that she would be given this kind of freedom. She had thought that she would need to ask for permission to do almost everything. But it turned out that this boss was so generous and he knew her character so well. She couldn't help but thank Celine in her heart for recommending her to Jack. "Thank you, boss." Grace stood up and gave Jack a slight bow. "I will make sure to do my best here." Jack nodded. Then, he sent Chris a message to come to the 30th floor. And not long after, he arrived. "Good morning, boss, Miss Grace," Chris greeted the moment that he entered the office. He had already met with Grace downstairs when she was about to come in. Furthermore, Jack had already informed him about her. Jack nodded and motioned for him to take a seat. After that, he said, "Chris, this is Miss Grace. She will be the one in charge of the department. You'll be her vice. But, if your performance doesn't match with her target, she has the authority to dismiss you. In other words, she has full authority over the department." Although Chris had expected that he wouldn't be the one at the top, he never thought that he would drop in less than a week. But, if the boss said so, what could he do? He could only obey and do whatever Jack wanted. So, he nodded his head in agreement. Furthermore, he looked at Grace with a hint of respect. He knew that Jack didn't just take in anyone to manage a business for him. And since he had chosen Grace as the head of the entire department, Grace must have abilities to make him make this decision. "By the way, did you open the account that I asked you to?" Jack asked. "Yes, boss." Chris nodded in agreement. Jack nodded and asked for the account number. Immediately after that, he transferred $1,159,520,179 to that account. This was his decision, wanting to remove the many figures and remain with a string of zeros. After his expenditure the previous day, he had a balance of $9,962,985,379. Then, that night, another $196,534,800 entered the account after being multiplied by the system, bringing his balance to $10,159,520,179. Now, his balance was at $9 billion. He looked at Grace as he handed her the card and said, "There's slightly over $1 billion in the card. I believe it should be enough to dominate the city when it comes to groceries, right?" Chris, W, degree O degree, W, Grace, degree O degree. Chapter 65, Departure. The expression of the two became funny and somehow weird in that Jack himself wondered if there was something strange that he'd just said. What's wrong with that look on your faces? Have I not just stated that there's $1 billion in the card for the operations of the department? Why are you looking at me in such a way? Jack thought to himself. It was only after about a minute, when Jack was almost getting tired of holding his hand in the air, that the duo came out of their shock. Of course, the tiredness that Jack felt was simply the impatience, nothing more. Grace hurriedly stood up on her feet as she received the card with trembling hands. After all, this card contained over $1 billion in it. This was an amount that she'd never had a chance to get a hold of at once. Although if the money that had passed through her hands was added, it could reach it, it was different to have all of this amount in her hands at the same time. Her heart trembled a little as she looked at Jack. This guy had not only trusted her by entrusting the entire department to her, he was even giving her $1 billion funds. This in itself made her determined to ensure that the department succeeded, just like how Jack wanted. She gave Jack another bow as she said, "Thank you, boss, for your trust. I won't fail you." Determination could be felt from her voice. This accompanied by the look in her eyes, Jack knew that she was serious about what she had said. Although Jack was handing over everything in the department to be under her management, it was not that he trusted her. After all, who could trust another person when they had met in less than an hour? It was just that he decided to put his faith in her character and Celine's choice. As for Celine, he wasn't sure why he himself trusted Celine, although they had only recently met. But, even if his faith failed him and Grace eloped with all the money, he wasn't worried at all. He would just have to invest another amount of money, and at the same time, there would be no way that he would let her leave just like that. In the future, once his connections were big enough, he was sure that he would be able to find her no matter where she was hiding. And then, he would make sure that he punished her. After all, how could he accept someone messing with him? As for now, since she thought that he trusted her, he wouldn't change her mind at all. It would be good for her to think that he trusted her so that she could reveal her real character if the present one was a facade. No need for that. Just do your work well. And by the way, don't be afraid of spending the money that I've given out. Spend it to ensure that the department soars," Jack said. After seeing that the duo were in agreement, he added, "All the income that comes from the daily sales, you don't need to send them to me. Just reinvest them back into the department to support the development. All that I'll want to see would be the monthly reports, that's all." Grace and Chris nodded in unison. They could feel that their boss was quite generous. They were about to leave when Jack stated, "Grace, stay behind first." Grace nodded before sitting back on the chair. Chris, on the other hand, left after giving Jack a bow. He felt that Jack had done him a great favor. As a manager, his biggest pride would be to see the business that was under his management reaching the sky. Now that he'd gotten a good boss that wasn't afraid of spending, he had already began looking forward to the future where he would be known as a manager of a big brand. After Chris left, Jack stated, "You'll start with a monthly salary of $150,000. When the department develops further, you'll get an increase. What do you think?" Grace wasn't expecting that she would receive such a big salary. After all, according to what she knew, this was just the start in a small city. If the department grew further, she surely would have a bigger income and reputation. "Thank you, boss." For now, Grace could only say these words. But in her heart, she swore that she would ensure that she did her best to make sure that the department that she was in charge of reached higher lengths. "Another thing, there are two of my first employees in Yellow Street. They are Agnes and Charles. These two, I promised them that I would promoted them. So, they should be in charge of the specific department in Yellow and Alpine Streets. But of course, in the future, if their performance is poor, you can do what needs to be done. Jack said. As for George, after knowing his background, he needed some reconsiderations about what to do when his period of the bet agreement came to an end. At first, Grace's expression changed to that of uncertainty. But, when she heard Jack's last statement, her expression eased a lot. She had almost thought that Jack preferred relationships to performance. Turns out that she was thinking too much. So, she nodded in agreement. There's a car that I've come with. It's a Bentley Bentayga. There are several of them where I live. They belong to your department. So, you can see how they are going to be distributed. Furthermore, there are others that are going to be in charge of the deliveries, Cascadia Freightliners. The ones that I ordered would be coming within this week. After a few more instructions, Jack drafted a contract and they signed before Grace left. Jack had also made sure to inform her that the subordinates of the enterprise would have the bonuses as long as they performed well. This was a decision that he'd come with to make sure that none of his subordinates decided to give up after seeing that their efforts were not appreciated. Looking at the time, it was already more than 20 minutes past 10. So, he decided to go out as Gabriel Wadi was arriving on this specific day. He still had a trip to make to Venture City. The earlier that he left, the better it would be. So, he took out his phone and contacted Pilot Gabriel. Hello, Mr. Jackson? An uncertain male voice resounded in his ears from the phone. Yes. Pilot Gabriel, I wonder where you're now? Jack asked. I'm just about to enter Inchoate City. Gabriel replied. You're using a taxi or are you driving? Jack asked again. Oh, I'm in a taxi. Gabriel replied, wondering what was wrong. Okay then. Tell the driver to take you to Windhill Residential Area, and bring you to the Prince and Princess Palace. After getting there, you can call me. Jack said. Okay then. Gabriel replied. After the call ended, Jack called the captain of the guards back at the mansion and instructed him that he should let Gabriel in when he arrived there. After that, he wondered what to do next. After thinking things through, he decided to just go back to the palace and change the clothes that he was wearing. After all, currently, he was only wearing casual clothes. Since he was going to discuss a business deal, he thought that it wouldn't hurt to wear official clothing. So, he got out of the office and drove the Bentayga towards the palace. When he arrived, he found that Gabriel had already arrived. In fact, he had just arrived and entered the palace about a minute before Jack arrived. As expected, his phone rang not long after. Hello, Mr. Jackson, I've already arrived. Gabriel said. I'll be there in about a minute. Jack replied as he drove the car into the compound. The moment that he approached the garage, he found that Gabriel was busy staring at the Eurocopter that was on the garage's roof. The moment that he noticed that a car was approaching, he turned his gaze towards it. Jack alighted after parking the car next to the others. After that, he headed towards Gabriel and shook his hand as he asked, "What do you think about that machine? It looks good. It should be new, right?" Gabriel's eyes when it came to aircrafts was quite good. He had already noticed that the Eurocopter was new. Jack wondered what he would think after seeing that the Eurocopter had traveled 0 miles. Jack then led the way to the garage and opened the staircase that led to the roof. Just like on Friday night, the floor shifted as the cars were moved to the side, revealing the staircase and the pathway that extended from the ground to the ceiling. Gabriel was amazed by the level of technology here. This was a level that could be found in the big cities the size of the capital city or in the cities of those giant countries. After that, the two went up to the roof. After seeing the Eurocopter from such a short distance, Gabriel was even more amazed by it. He could already tell that it was a customized one. This Eurocopter should be worth at least $150 million. Gabriel exclaimed in shock after Jack did the introduction about the Eurocopter. Gabriel shouted these words the moment that he heard about Eco and what it could do. Jack, on the other hand, was quite surprised that the system had given his such an expensive aircraft. After all, the first-time reward of the stores was only a bike worth about $170,000. But now, this reward was worth more than 2 Bugatti Veyron sports cars that he had received from the system. Jack, of course, tried ignoring Gabriel's fanatic gaze as he looked at the Eurocopter. He simply left him there to get familiar with it and went back to the mansion to change into the white suit that was made from cashmere. When he came back, he found that Gabriel had already gotten familiar with the aircraft with the help of Eco. Furthermore, he had already changed from his casual clothes to his pilot uniform. After Jack got into the Eurocopter, he sat next to Gabriel with the intention of learning from him how to fly a plane. After a series of buttons that looked like a riddle to Jack, the plane flew into the air as it left the palace grounds. But, at that moment, Jack noticed something strange. He seemed to be capable of remembering each and every action and button that Gabriel had taken and pressed. Chapter 66, Venture City. Jack wasn't sure about the reason behind this. But there was one thing that he was sure about on his mind, that was that his memory was better than before. As he tried thinking, he suddenly found that he could clearly remember almost everything that had happened since the moment that he received the advance reward. Although it wasn't to the extent of having a photographic memory, he could still remember most of the important details. Now, he couldn't hold his curiosity anymore and asked, "Angel, do you know why I can suddenly remember almost everything that happened yesterday from the moment that I received the advance reward?" That's normal. Being a professional combatant, you need to have such a memory. In fact, this is developed as long as you improve. The more you improve, the better your senses, your physical quality, and so is the enhancement of the internal body organs. The brain was improved due to this. Angel's reply made Jack somehow surprised. He then wondered if he could get photographic memory as long as he trained further and become far stronger than he was now. Forget about that. You don't even know how strong you're right now, how can you improve? What are you improving? You don't know what weaknesses there on your body, but you're already dreaming about becoming even stronger? How's that possible? The system's guardian never minced its words at all and gave Jack a jab to the jaw. As a result, Jack held his chin as he fell into deep thoughts. He was just thinking of how to know his current maximum strength when he suddenly remembered something. He was supposed to pay attention to how Gabriel was flying the Eurocopter. He might as well know a thing or two so that he could fly it in times of emergencies. After all, he wasn't expecting that Gabriel would always be present the moment that he wanted to go somewhere. As he observed how he was operating, Jack could clearly remember everything that Gabriel was doing. But at the end of the day, he didn't understand why such a button was pressed or why a certain switch was flicked. So, at the end of it all, he decided to give up on it as he rested while enjoying the scenery on the way. He had never toured his own country in the 19 years of his life. In fact, they were all spent in Crystal City and Inchoate City. This would be the first time that he could observe the landscape of the country. Inchoate City as well as Crystal City were located in the Western Province. In Azima country, there were 5 provinces. The 4 cardinal points as well as the Central Province. Jack was in the Western Province. The capital of Azima country was found in the Central Province. When it came to the difference in terms of development, Central Province was like a giant city while the Western Province was like a small town. All of this was something that Jack had learnt during the days that he was still in school. As he looked at the lush trees, hills and streams as the Eurocopter flew forward, Jack suddenly remembered that there was something that he hadn't done yet. That was booking a place that he would be staying for the night. After all, Venture City was located at the far end of the Western Province, closer to the Central Province. So, the distance was long, and even when flying, he would take at least 4 hours to reach it. They had left at around 11. They would arrive at around 3 p.m. in the very least. As Jack thought of this, he suddenly had an idea. Why not simply stay in the hotel that he would be meeting with Edwin? With that thought, he decided to send him a message through TM, or in full, text me. This was the most famous chatting platform in Azima country and several other neighboring countries. Hello, Mr. Edwin. Where are we meeting? Not long after he sent the text, there was a reply from Edwin. Let's meet at the Cloudy restaurant. I wonder at what time you're arriving. Jack read the text and replied. I'll be there by 3:45 p.m. if there are no accidents. I'll be waiting. And with that, the chatting ended. Jack relaxed as he thought to himself how long he was going to spend at Venture City. According to his thought process, it wouldn't be bad to spread his wings in Venture City as well. Currently, it can be said that in Inchoate City, things have been stabilized. Now, what remained would be to ensure that the grocery department was well known there in Inchoate City by creating a good reputation for it. If there was a competition, he had his own means of defeating them. If the normal means failed, he would just lower the price and sell them at the exact price that he'd bought. He was sure that none of those that wanted to compete with him would be able to reduce the price. After all, the moment that they did that, their income won't be able to make up for their losses. Of course, such means could only be applied to those that tried provoking him. If not, he would just follow the normal means by competing in terms of quality of the products as well as service. Just at this moment, he thought of another thing. That's right, Blue City was just along the way to Venture City. So, by the time that he would be coming back, I would collect all the shares that were in Ben's hands. Of course, he knew that by the time that he came back, he would be late by a few days, but that wouldn't stop him from collecting the debt that others owed him. Furthermore, he was quite curious about how the system was going to multiply the shares, considering the fact that the shares were also part of the income that he'd earned from betting with Ben. As Jack's thoughts drifted, hours flashed by. It was only when they were closing in on Venture City that Jack suddenly remembered that he hadn't eaten yet. It seemed that he wasn't the only one that had forgotten about the food. After all, Gabriel left Inchoate City a few minutes after arriving. At that time, he was quite curious about the Eurocopter and was impatient in that he wanted to fly it right away. On the other hand, Jack was quite looking forward on the new company that he was going to take over. As such, the two excited men flew out of the city, forgetting that the journey that they were going on was going to be long. Furthermore, other than the water that was in the helicopter, none of them carried food with them. Jack could only sigh at how careless he was. He had forgotten even the basic thing that a human body needed. Furthermore, now that his physique had been enhanced, his appetite had greatly been increased. He decided that he would just make sure that he ate all that could be eaten the moment that he arrived in the restaurant till he satiated his hunger. Not long after, he saw high-rise buildings appearing in the horizon. He could already tell that they were approaching Venture City. You can just land wherever we are allowed to land. After that, we can simply take a cab to the location, the Cloudy restaurant. Jack spoke as he saw the tall buildings getting bigger the closer they got. Got it. Gabriel replied. He had been here several times when he was flying some clients of Skyflight charters. So, he was quite familiar with this city. Not long after they arrived at the city, Jack could clearly see that the buildings here were by far bigger and longer than those that were found in Crystal City, not to mention Inchoate City. The skyscrapers had at least 100 floors. So, compared to these buildings here, Jack's business overlord building was just like a normal cabin as compared to a mansion or a villa. Jack was immediately fascinated by the buildings here and decided that he would move here and make it his base. After all, not only was the population here bigger than in Inchoate City, the businesses that he could buy here were many. Gabriel flew the plane and landed it inside an airstrip. In this city, there was an airport and 2 airstrips. Of course, these airstrips were mainly for those with private aircrafts, just like Jack's Eurocopter. As long as one had money, they could land their plane here. On the other hand, Inchoate City had no airstrip, let alone an airport. Jack shook his head as he thought of how far behind Inchoate City was. After they landed, Jack got out of the plane as he asked Gabriel, "Are you coming with me for a meal?" "There's no need to disturb you since you're here for business." "I'll be okay. When you're done, you can just find me here." Gabriel shook his head as he replied. Jack nodded and didn't force him. After all, it seemed that Gabriel had fallen in love with the Eurocopter and wanted to continue playing with it. Since Gabriel was familiar with the people here, They arranged Jack's means of transportation and Jack hurried towards Cloudy Hotel. Of course, since this was his first time, he didn't know where it was located unless he looked at the map. As the driver of the Lamborghini Urus pointed as he talked about the streets that they were passing, Jack listened carefully, and not long after that, he decided that he would make himself familiar with this city. Not long after, the car arrived in front of a magnificent building. The name Cloudy Restaurant was very eye-catching. Chapter 67, Successfully Acquired. Jack didn't wait for the driver to park the car in the specified parking lot area of the restaurant. Instead, since he was here for a deal, he decided to bid goodbye to this driver that have brought him here. After entering the restaurant, Jack was welcomed by a beautiful waitress. "Hello, sir, do you have any reservations?" the lady asked. "Not really, but I'm supposed to meet with someone in private room number 5. Jack replied. When the lady heard Jack's words, he was stunned for a moment before she smiled brightly at Jack and welcomed him. "You must be Mr. Jack. Mr. Edwin told me to take you there the moment that you arrive," the lady said. According to the agreement with Edwin, they were going to meet in the private room number 5. Not only were the services for those who occupied private rooms good, but they also had some privacy when discussing business matters. The waitress led the way to the private room number 5 that was located on the second floor. Jack could see how magnificent the restaurant was just from the luxurious decorations of the restaurant. Not long after, they arrived in front of the private room. The lady knocked the door before opening it, then ushered Jack in. Jack didn't stand in ceremony and entered the room. The private room was quite spacious as compared to the floor where the general diners took their meals. Inside the spacious room, there was a man who seemed to be in his late 40s. He was seated there with some documents that he was going through. As soon as the door was opened, he looked up and faced the door. Upon seeing Jack, who was following behind the waitress, Edwin's brows raised a little bit. Even though Jack's voice was young, he had not expected that Jack was this young. Although he was quite suspicious about Jack's abilities, he still stood up to welcome him. After all, they were going to carry out a business transaction, and it would be rude if he treated the other party as a junior, and not as an equal. So, Edward stretched his hand for a handshake as he said with a smile, "Welcome, Mr. Jack. I hope the journey wasn't so harsh on you." Jack revealed his usual shallow smile as he replied, "Not at all, Mr. Edwin. I hope you haven't waited for so long." "Not at all, I arrived about 5 minutes ago." Edwin shook his head as he replied. He then motioned for Jack to have a seat. The moment that the two sat down, the waitress left the room so that she could prepare the meal that Edwin had already ordered. He was the host here, and as a result, he had to treat Jack to a meal. As the two chatted with each other, the food was served. The food was made from high-quality ingredients. From the way that Jack could see, the level of this restaurant was not below Glaze Hotel. In fact, it was a top-notch higher as compared to the branch that the Glaze Hotel had opened in Inchoate City. The only branches that could compare to the level of this restaurant were those that had been set up in bigger cities. Since Jack was already hungry, he stuffed himself till he was full. He didn't care about Edwin, who was looking at him weirdly. He was hungry. What was there to talk about when there was food in front of him? Even he himself was surprised by his own appetite, as he hadn't expected that such a huge amount of food could enter his stomach. It took him about 20 minutes to have his fill. It was only then that he began discussing the issue about the company transfer with Edwin. Although Edwin was quite stunned by Jack's behavior, he didn't say anything considering that Jack had just gotten here from the far end of the western province. "So are you sure about taking over the company?" Edwin asked to confirm again. "Just name the price." "I have already done my research about the company. I'm impressed with it. So, I am going to acquire it," Jack replied nonchalantly. When Edwin had his words, his heart buzzed with excitement. He wanted to sell this company off so that he could get enough capital to venture into another industry. According to his previous estimations, it would have taken a period of at least 3 months for him to get a buyer as well as come to an agreement about the price at which he was going to sell the company. But now, Jack had clearly stated that he was going to take over the company no matter what price it was. But of course, the range of the price of a company had to be within a reasonable range. After all, although his company was worth at least $2 billion, there was no way that a person could buy it at a price of $10 billion. This person could as well start another one that would be bigger than the one that he was selling. At this moment, he realized that Heyman had done him a favor by recommending his company to Jack. He decided that he would pay back this favor to Heyman when given an opportunity. Since you already are determined to acquire the company, I will offer you the company at the price of $4 billion. This will include all the assets plus the contracts that have already been signed by the company. Of course, the buildings are amongst the assets that are being offered. Edwin stated enthusiastically. Jack nodded. This price was quite reasonable considering that the company already has a good reputation. With the reputation plus his own funds, it would not be long before the company reached higher levels. Do I do the transfer right now after signing the contract, or are there any procedures that we have to follow? Jack asked. Although Edwin was expecting such an answer, he was shocked that Jack could give out that amount of money immediately. After all, although there were many billionaires out there, they were mainly considered as billionaires due to their assets. Furthermore, not many of them could fork out billions of dollars easily. Now he was trying to think about Jack's real background. And although he was quite excited, he didn't show his emotions so openly. He showed a smile as he said, I have long prepared the documents that are required for the transfer. So, we can complete the procedure right now as I carried it with me. The moment that Jack heard these words, he smiled because he wanted to spend as less time as possible in acquiring a company. In this way, the amount of income that he would be receiving would be exponentially increased earlier. This added to the fact that Jack had a system with the 100 times multiplier. It won't be long before he recovered the amount of money that he had spent. Furthermore, he was quite curious about the first income reward that he was going to receive. So, he hurried to ask the system guardian, according to the income of the company, what period would the income be multiplied? That solely depends on how the business operates. If it is one that brings in income on a monthly basis, then the multiplier effect would be carried out during the end of the month. On the other hand, if it is something that is paid once in a year, then that income would be multiplied either at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year. Since Safety Enforcers is one that works with contracts, the multiplier effect will be carried out on a monthly basis. Jack let out a sigh of relief the moment that he heard these words. He was still at the starting phase of the enterprise and the funds that were needed were humongous. As such, he preferred his income being multiplied on a short period basis. After Jack's agreement, Edwin took out the transfer agreement. The agreement stated that he was transferring the full ownership rights of the company to Jack. After reading through the agreement and making sure that there was no loophole in it, Jack immediately put his signature on the agreement. After that, Edwin gave the account number to Jack and Jack did the transfer. The moment that he saw the bank message showing that he had received the money, he couldn't help but smile gleefully. This deal was done and he now had enough money to invest somewhere else. As such, he was in a very good mood. He took 2 glasses and poured red wine in them. Then, he offered Jack one of them with the intention of toasting him. On the other hand, Jack didn't drink wine. As a result, he could only replace it with juice. Even so, Edwin didn't mind considering that it was true that he hadn't seen Jack taking a sip of wine, although they had several expensive bottles here. Furthermore, Jack was indeed still young. After that, the two talked a lot as Jack asked about Venture City. Since the headquarters of Safety Enforcers was situated here, Jack would have to stay here for a while to make sure that things were on the right track before leaving. But of course, he was going to make sure that he would start investing in anything that he could, so that he could earn more. It was also at this moment that Jack thought of something. Mr. Edwin, do you happen to know where there are fighting competitions? Chapter 68, Ultimate Arena. Mr. Edwin, do you happen to know where there are fighting competitions? Edwin wasn't expecting such a question from Jack at this moment. But all the same, he still asked curiously, do you also like participating in the betting? Not at all. I'm just curious about the competition. In fact, I wanted to try out my abilities there. Jack responded honestly. In fact, although there were several fights back in Crystal City, he had never attended to any. After all, he wasn't someone that was so much focused on things like betting or fighting for entertainment. He was busy looking for ways to save more money and not to go around risking losing even more money. Edwin raised his brows a little. He didn't expect that Jack had a hobby of fighting. But anyway, everyone had their own preference. Although Jack was rich and that he could pay $4 billion all at once, that didn't imply that he wasn't a human. I didn't know that you have such a hobby, Edwin chuckled as he said these words. On the other hand, Jack couldn't help but say to himself, of course you won't know because this is the first time that we're meeting. How can you know about a thing that even I myself didn't know about? Edwin thought for a moment before saying, I happen to know a friend of mine who likes these fights. I can ask him about that. Jack nodded in appreciation. It would be good if he could finish the system's task as soon as possible and make the fighting ability become his permanently. Edwin took his phone and made a call. Hello Linus, I have a friend here that wants to join a fighting competition. I don't know if you can help me in making the arrangements? Yeah, here's right here with me. You mean that you're there already? It seems that you're really addicted to this game of yours. Don't worry about him, he intends to join, but you can ask about the details after we come there. Alright, it won't be long before we arrive. After that, Edwin ended the call and looked at Jack with a smile. You're really lucky, Mr. Jack. There happens to be a competition that's going to start at around 6 in the evening. As long as we get there on time, you can register and participate in it. Is it big? Jack asked. For the system task, he wasn't supposed to participate in something that couldn't be recognized as a competition. If it was just a sparring session, the system would definitely not recognize that as a competition. Oh, look at me. I forgot to tell you. My friend is one of the big bosses of an arena called Ultimate Arena. Every third week of the month, there's usually a tournament called Ultimate Championship. Edwin slapped his forehead as he explained. It turned out that this was an arena set up by a few big bosses of Venture City. Although it made profits for them, they mostly used it as their source of entertainment. Every month, there was a fighting championship that lasted for 2 days. It was carried out during the third week of every month. And today, it was 21st of July. This was the second last week of the month. The first day was mainly the preliminaries and elimination matches. The following day was a time for the top 8 to fight it out. The number of people who registered for this fight didn't matter at all. What mattered was the fact that they arranged for there to only be 8 people remaining by the end of the first day of the competition. As a result, the competition went on till midnight sometimes. As Jack listened to the explanation, he nodded. It seemed to be a grand one. But it seemed that there was another championship that only happened in December. It was the Super Ultimate Championship. This determined the real champion of the arena. Jack got interested in it. If it happened that he was here in December, he would surely participate in it to make a few dollars as well as to test out the strength of those that claimed to be the champions of the arena. Although Edwin wasn't entitled to helping Jack, he was quite free at this moment and decided to accompany him. What had made him stressed out all this while was of course the issue of selling the company. But now that it had been sold, he could relax for a while. Furthermore, he was quite curious about Jack's abilities and the reason for his confidence to ask if the competition was big. So, they left in his Mercedes-Benz AMG S63 V8. Edwin drove the car himself and took Jack towards the eastern part of the city. Not long after that, they arrived in an area that was quite compact with many buildings, and the population in this part of the city was high. Furthermore, he could already tell that this part of the city wasn't doing good. Turns out that every city has its own lesser areas. Jack thought to himself as he alighted from the car. He could already tell the reason as to why the arena was located in this part of the city. This was the side that had the poor population of the city. Most of the fighters of the arena came from this group of people. There were people that were desperate to get money and had no choice but to try their luck in the ring. Of course, this was the area that those without power stayed. So, these big bosses could easily cheat them if there was a need to do that. Or, they could eliminate them without much of a problem if they offended them. Although there was law, there was always the other side of the coin. For law enforcers to exist, those that broke the laws must be present. These bosses had their influence over the city and they had their own people in the police as well. So, it wasn't hard for them to get away with it after committing a crime. Jack followed Edwin to a path that led to a building that looked old. He raised his brows while looking at the warehouse-like building that seemed to be collapsing the next moment. He wondered if it was safe to be in there. Edwin seemed to have noticed his worries and reassured him, "Don't worry about it, Mr. Jack, this place is safe. Although it looks like it's going to collapse soon, it has been reinforced by steel bars." Jack obviously couldn't believe such a thing. It won't collapse? This thing needs to be demolished so that it can be reconstructed. Even though he thought that way, he still nodded to Edwin as they headed into the warehouse-like building. When they reached the entrance, Jack could see that there were several steel bars that were holding the roof and the walls from the inside. Furthermore, it seemed that the inside was quite steady. But what made Jack confused was the fact that the whole warehouse seemed empty apart from a few people that were loitering around. There was no arena at all. There was one end that had a few people congested. A crowd of about 30 people seemed to be arguing about something. He was just about to ask about it when he saw that Edwin hadn't stopped but seemed to be heading towards the side of the warehouse with fewer people. Jack followed closely behind him, and not long after, they arrived at an entry that led to another room. There were several bulky men with sinister faces standing there with metal rods in their hands. The moment that they approached, these guys moved to the side to let them pass. They greeted Edwin enthusiastically as they entered. From this, Jack could already infer that this wasn't the first time that Edwin was here. After all, the way that he was familiar with the route in this small group of gangsters, it was obvious that he had been here a few times or more than that. Anyway, Jack didn't care about it. He simply followed behind Edwin, who then began explaining, "This is the path that the big bosses follow. There's another entry to the arena that the other folks use. But, it's always crowded with people. There are those bosses that don't want to be seen in public. So, they usually use another entrance. But, I'm in no mood to go around to enter, as I'm used to coming to this part of the city to recruit a few people into the company." As Edwin spoke, Jack finally understood why Edwin was familiar with this area. From his words, he seemed to be diligent in running the company and that he personally came out to recruit a few talents by himself. If he could find a good fighter, as long as that person received good training, it was a sure bet that he could make a good bodyguard. Furthermore, those that won the fights here had experienced the difficulties of life and weren't afraid of killing if necessary. Just this decisive side of them made them qualified to be bodyguards. They could kill an enemy as long as the enemy had the intention of killing their client. Not long after, they reached stairs that led underground. Just from this entrance, Jack could already hear the sound of a crowd. He hadn't expected that the arena was actually located underground. As they walked down the stairs, the sound of the shouts of the crowd became louder. After a while, they arrived in an open space in a well-lit underground stadium. That's right, this place was not small as compared to a stadium. Although it was underground, it was well lit. With the current level of technology, it wasn't hard for them to easily create an underground stadium. All that was required was funds. But, Jack was sure that these people had already gotten back what they had invested with interest. There was an arena in the lower area and several screens were hanging in the air, showing the ring below. Currently, they were displaying the initials of the arena UA and the championship, UC. Furthermore, there was a list of those that had registered being displayed on the list. Currently, there were more than 50 names being displayed. Jack's current area was blocked with glasses that allowed one to see the arena, but those beyond the glass couldn't see what lay behind. This was a setup for the confidentiality of the big bosses. They were just about to enter a room where registration was carried out when a cold voice reached their ears. "Oh, isn't this Mr. Edwin?" I wonder if you're here for a competition, or are you here to get a few more guards? Chapter 69, Wanna bet? Oh, isn't this Mr. Edwin? I wonder if you're here for a competition, or are you here to get a few more guards? Looking behind them, they saw a group of 3 people coming their way. From what Jack could tell, just like them, they were just arriving at the arena. It seemed that they had used the other entrance that provided privacy from the public eye. Jack knew that most of people who came to such an event and were quite sneaky were sure to be malicious. They obviously must have done something and were trying to hide from the victims. But he couldn't rule out the fact that they might as well not enjoy publicity. But he simply could say that this guy was in the first category considering his sinister-looking face as well as his statement. Edwin looked at the man that had spoken. He was wearing a blue shirt and black trousers. He could be said to be quite casually dressed. But the heavy golden chains around his neck made him look like a gangster. Austin, what does that have to do with you? Edwin asked as discontentment could get detected from his voice. Just from this interaction, it was obvious that the two of them were not in good terms. And since this had nothing to do with him, Jack didn't plan to interfere. As long as these guys didn't look for trouble with him, he wouldn't even try provoking them. He would simply ignore their presence, that's all. But it seemed that he wasn't going to be let out of this even if he didn't want to get himself involved. Ha ha ha, of course it has something to do with me. After all, we're both here for the same purpose. So, we'll have to compete for the best of the fighters here. As Austin said these words, he stole a glance at Jack who was standing behind Edwin and asked, "What about that brat behind you? Are you planning on hiring him? I can see that he has a good figure, he seems fit enough." Jack on the other hand frowned the moment that he heard these words. Currently, he was wearing a white suit. Wasn't this enough to tell that guy that he had some kind of status? Furthermore, it could already be seen that although he was standing behind Edwin at this moment, it was simply because he didn't know this place. Otherwise, how could he walk behind someone that could be a lackey to him in the near future? At this moment, Jack decided to label this guy as a brainless man. So, he decided to ignore the provocation once again. After all, it wasn't too late to not get involved in the conflict between the two of them. Austin, is your brain filled with sh*t or something? How dare you speak about Mr. Jack in that manner? Since Edwin was the one that had brought Jack here, he had to be responsible for him. Furthermore, Jack's ability to pay $4 billion without bargaining was enough to say that Jack wasn't someone that just anybody could offend. Even he would rather have Jack as a friend rather than have him as an enemy. Now that there was someone that was trying to go against Jack, how could he stand idle? Furthermore, this was a good chance to make a good impression on Jack. In this way, they could have a mutual cooperation in the future. Mr. Jack? Edwin, have your standards been lowered to the extent that you'll call a small brat with such respect? Austin sneered as he gazed at Jack. Jack's face darkened at this moment. He thought, what the heck is wrong with you? I don't know you and you don't know me, why the hell are you targeting me every now and then? Austin, you better not get ahead of yourself if you want to survive in this city. You better know who you're talking to before you start spouting nonsense. Immediately after that, Edwin turned around and said to Jack, "Mr. Jack, let's get going lest this guy ruins our mood and delays you from getting registered." Jack nodded and the duo completely ignored Austin and the gang as they headed into a room. But they hadn't gone far when Austin's loud laughter and sarcastic question made them stop. Ha ha ha, so, that's the champion that you've brought to fight for you? Your standards surely have depreciated a lot during this past month. Austin stepped forward as he said these words. Jack couldn't help it anymore. This guy was targeting him again and again. He had tried ignoring him, but it seemed that this fly won't just fly away after he had waved his hand a few times. It seemed that it was time to initiate the fly swatting plan, FSP. After all, if this fly wasn't punished, it surely won't learn a lesson. And what was a good way of punishing this kind of fly? It was in a way that not only would the fly suffer, but the fly's demise would have to benefit him. So, before Edwin could speak up, he took a step forward as he looked at Austin. His aura was revealed at this moment. Alongside the indifferent expression on his face, it gave Austin a scare. But Austin composed himself not long after. At that time, when Jack was standing behind Edwin, he hadn't noticed Jack's demeanor. But now that Jack had gone forward, he could definitely feel that Jack wasn't an ordinary youth. "Do you want to bet with me?" Jack asked indifferently. Although Austin was surprised, after regaining his composure, he asked, "What's the bet about? You think that I can't perform well in the competition?" Jack deliberately lowered his standards to make sure that he wouldn't scare away the annoying fly. "Ha ha ha, if that's what you're talking about, then I have to say that is indeed what I was thinking." "No, not just thinking. Looking at your body size, you should be quite strong but not strong enough." Austin laughed as he said these words. "Still, wanna bet?" Jack couldn't be bothered and asked again. After thinking for a moment, Austin decided, "Okay then. What stake are you going to place? You can decide what you want from me if I lose the bet. On the other hand, I want you to give me 70% of your wealth." Jack said these words confidently. Although he could have asked for more than that, he didn't want to make this person think that he was eyeing him from the start and it was his plan to catch him. Austin frowned the moment that he heard these words. From the way that Jack had accepted the stake, as well as the confidence and decisiveness that he spoke with, Austin hesitated. This was to add to the fact that Edwin respected Jack a lot. He thought things through and felt that, although Jack could be a good fighter, that didn't imply that he could win. Although he was like a gangster, his mind wasn't small as well. After all, if he was stupid, how could he be able to compete with Edwin? Jack had stated that the bet would be if he could perform well in this championship. So, if he really did well, he would win the bet even without having to win the championship. In this way, Austin, would lose out. So, Austin decided to change the bet. "Let's bet on this. If you can win the championship, I will definitely give you 85% of all my accumulated wealth. On the other hand, you lose, and would in turn give me things worth my 85%. What do you think?" The moment that Jack heard these words, excitement boomed in his heart. But, on the surface, he didn't show any of it. In fact, he showed uncertainty. Upon seeing this, Austin was pleased with his bright and fast mind. "Austin, won't the bet be in your favor from the start? You'll have the best odds from the very beginning." Edwin chimed in at this moment. Austin frowned. He looked at Jack's hesitant expression and said through gritted teeth, "I'll make it 90%. I'll pay 90% of my wealth. On the other hand, you only have to pay 45% of my total wealth." Although he was quite sure that he would win this bet, there was no way that it was easy to gamble away the wealth that a person had accumulated over a long period of time. After all, accidents do happen. After seeing that Jack seemed not to be budging, black lines began forming on Austin's forehead as he glared at Jack and asked, "Is that not enough?" Upon noticing that the fly had reached the limit of how much benefits it could spit out, Jack decided to finally seal the deal. "Okay then. Let's have it like that." Austin smiled triumphantly. Edwin, on the other hand, was surprised. But at the same time, he decided not to interfere as this was Jack's decision. From the way that he had known Jack when they were chatting, he knew that Jack wasn't a careless person. Maybe he had abilities or confidence. Maybe he had a plan? Edwin didn't know but decided to wait and see. "I don't want you to go back on your words. Let's get in there and make the bet official," Austin stated with a smile as he led the way into the building. The corner of Jack's lips raised a little at this moment as he thought, "That's exactly what I'm afraid of about you. I don't want you to run away after I win the bet." Chapter 70, Championship Kickoff. Jack went into the room that was in charge of registration. There, Jack was registered for the competition. In that moment, Jack had seen a few more people coming to be registered for the fighting competition. Immediately after that, using the official betting platform officials present here, Jack and Austin placed their bets alongside their stakes. Jack realized that the big bosses that had already arrived at the scene were those that wanted to look for talents to recruit or to make a deal with the fighters before the fights began. In this way, if the fighter that they chose won, they would surely benefit a lot. At around 5:10 p.m., Jack went to the waiting room. There, he waited alongside the other fighters for the fighting competition to begin. There were a few that were warming up by throwing punches at the punching bag, or some were just punching the air. Jack was currently dressed in a pair Nike Miller t-shirt, Nike tight sports trousers, as well as white Nike sports shoes. On his face, there was a silver mask that covered the upper part of his face. That's what Jack had decided on. There were several times that the fights were recorded and posted on the internet platforms. So, as a future boss, there was no way that he was going to allow people seeing him fight in such a shabby place, right? There were several people that were eyeing Jack curiously. Although Jack wasn't the first person to wear a mask in the arena, there were only a few people that did that. Most of them had a background and had come here to experience the fights, but they didn't want their identity to be exposed. Hey there. You wanna spar a little before the match starts? A man without a shirt, a muscled body with several hideous scars on it, spoke with a smile on his face. He was eyeing Jack with disdain in his eyes. Jack could already see it, as the other party didn't even try hiding it. Jack wondered what he had done wrong for people to just target him one after the other. He couldn't help but twist his head as he tried looking at his back for any target that had been placed there. Although he couldn't see his back well, but he was sure that there was nothing there. Then why is it that some people won't rest till they come to provoke me? Seeing that Jack had ignored him, the man couldn't help but frown. He stared at Jack coldly as he asked, "Hey, I'm talking to you. Do you want to spar with me or not?" This time, his voice was quite forceful. It was as if he was coercing Jack to have a spar with him. At this moment, even a fool could already tell that this guy had come here with an intention of doing something. Jack frowned as he looked at him. Then, he spoke coldly, "If you want to fight, then find me in the ring and stop being annoying here." The moment that scarred person heard this, he was immediately angered. After all, he wasn't a newbie here in the arena. Most of the people here always gave him face and respect or feared him. Now, someone said that he was annoying. Who's this guy? Who are you asking? Can't you see that he's wearing a mask? Anyway, he has guts to talk to the Scarred Tiger like that. Do you think that he can defeat Scarred Tiger in the ring? What nonsense are you spouting? Although Scarred Tiger wasn't the champion last month, he reached the semi-finals. So what if he reached the semi-finals? It's not like he was the champion. You talk too much. But, do you think that the silver mask there has a big background? What background? If he had a good background, why is he here and not being given the special treatment like Mad Lion? Hey, Mad Lion was the champion for the past 3 months. Do you think such a person can compare to him? The conversation between several fighters fed Jack, who had sharp senses, with some pieces of information. It turned out that the person in front of him was in the top 4 in the previous month's competition. So, that was why he was so arrogant, Jack finally understood. But, that didn't matter to him, as even while he was seated in front of this so-called Scarred Tiger, there was no sign of danger at all. In other words, this person was far weaker than him, in that, even if he sneaked an attack at Jack at this moment, Jack wouldn't be in any kind of danger that could threaten his life. So, he completely ignored the person that was still looking smug the moment that he heard the comments of praise from the other fighters. He looked at Jack, wanting to see his current expression. But, the smug smile on his face disappeared the moment that he saw that Jack had completely ignored his presence. He couldn't help it but stretch his hand to grab at Jack's mask while saying, "I want to see what face you're hiding behind that mask. I want to see what face of yours that can be so arrogant in front of me." Pa! Just as the hand was about to grab the mask from Jack's face, Jack raised his left hand and slapped the hand away. Although he didn't use that much force, it had already made Scarred Tiger to stagger to the side. Nobody saw how it happened. They only heard the sound of something being slapped, but they didn't see the action. All they saw was Jack's body shaking a little before the sound, accompanied by Scarred Tiger staggering sideways. Scarred Tiger was surprised that he'd been pushed to the side that easily. He was better than the other fighters that were present here and had only seen Jack raising his hand. What followed was that he felt his hand being knocked to the side by a powerful force. He could already tell from the force and speed of the attack at this time that Jack was strong. If he wasn't serious, there was no way that he could win the fight. But fights were not allowed in the changing room. There were several cameras here that were monitoring them. If he dared to fight with Jack at this moment, he would be disqualified from participating in the competition and he would have to pay penalty fee. That was an amount that he couldn't afford. The only way that the fights were allowed here was in the form of sparring. That meant that both sides had agreed to this. Furthermore, the sparring session wouldn't be intense. That was what he was aiming at. He could use the sparring session to injure Jack. In this way, he would fulfill the task that he'd been given. But upon experiencing Jack's strength firsthand, he decided to make sure that if he met with Jack in the ring, he would make sure to cripple him and kill him if possible. With Jack's current strength and instincts, how could he not detect the faint killing intent that was pointed at him? He frowned as his gaze turned cold. He gazed at Scarred Tiger with a frown on his face. The moment that Scarred Tiger saw this, his heart skipped a beat. That was not only due to the surprise of the fact that Jack had detected his malicious intentions, but to the gaze that Jack had given him. This gaze made him feel a chill running down his spine. He felt the temperatures around the two of them freezing, but surprisingly, sweat began appearing on his forehead and back. It was only after Jack had retracted his gaze that Scarred Tiger regained himself. He looked at Jack and decided to make sure that he could kill Jack in the ring if they met. He snorted as he left. "Humph! Let's meet in the ring then." Jack completely ignored him and decided to wait till the moment that the championship was going to begin. The other fighters on the side could already see that Jack had fallen out with Scarred Tiger. They didn't know if they had to admire Jack for his courage or pity him for his stupidity. Scarred Tiger wasn't someone simple. He was someone with a strong backing. But he himself was cruel to the opponents and himself. In the ring, he sometimes would let his opponents to attack him as he counterattacked with more force. The scars on his body were from the gang fights. After all, he was currently a member of one of the gangster groups in the city, the Wilds Gang. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to July's UA's. For those of you who are here for the first time, I will elaborate it to you. UA stands for Where You Are, Ultimate Arena. As for UC, that stands for the Ultimate Championship. At around 5:30, a man in a uniform that looked like that of a referee's went on the arena. The arena where the fights took place was as big as a basketball court. It was just that it was a square and not rectangular. It was raised by about a meter from the ground. It was currently well lit by the lights that came from the ceilings of the underground arena. The whole arena was a circle. Around the arena, there were seats that formed a major segment. The seats were arranged just like how they would be in a stadium. The area that the minor segment was, there was a room that had glass windows. These were the special glass windows that allowed people inside to look outside but not vice versa. This was where the big bosses sat as they watched the matches. The room was just above the changing room of the fighters. And the only path that led to and from the ring was located below the VIP room. Tonight, we have a total of 182 fighters that have signed up for the fight. We're going to start the preliminaries a few minutes earlier than always due to a special request from one of the big bosses. So, let the championship officially begin.